He's a very interesting opponent, very dangerous.
What makes him dangerous?
He's pretty aggressive and he's done pretty well.
When you see him playing, he's in your face, relentless.
He was like 9-tabling heads up against 3 different opponents, one of which was like Jungle Man.
He took the game in a different way, in a new level.
What's up guys, Dogpolk here, and today we're going to be taking a little trip down memory lane. Now, for some of you, in fact I imagine a lot of you, you're going to know what story we're about to talk about. But for you guys that are newer to poker, you found out about the game in the last few years, you might not know that this ever even happened. The year was 2009 and it was a simpler time. A time of wonder. A time of Guy Liberté. Now back in those days, there were a lot of nosebleed games across many sites, but Full Tilt was the home of the biggest and brightest battles. There was a table known as Rail Heaven, which was a $500, $1,000 blind table. Generally speaking, it would have one weaker recreational business type guy and 5 pros, and they would be duking it out for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And this is really the time period where we saw most of the biggest pots in the history of online poker. Now, before we jump in and talk about the day where Isildur lost $4 million to Brian Hastings, I want to give a little backstory, a little context. And some of you guys might remember this happening. I remember watching this on Full Tilt. Truly an epic time for online poker, where Dur and Isildur had been duking it out. And it was a real classic matchup. We saw Tom Dwan, a favorite of many, really believed to be possibly the best player in online poker, going up against some unknown player named Isildur 1 from Sweden. And so I would say most of the community felt like Tom Dwan was going to for sure win. They felt like he was the stronger player. This guy was unknown. But the guy had a lot of skills. This Swedish player, he would constantly go all in. He'd bet more than the size of the pot. And here's the thing that he would do. He would oftentimes bet almost instantly, even in huge pots. Certainly an epic moment in online poker history. And I went through and found what I believe to be is the biggest pot played between Dur and Isildur. And I think you guys are going to find this one pretty interesting. So let's go ahead and just do this one without hole cards, and we'll show at the end so you guys can think about what sort of hands they might have here. Dur decides to open to 3x. Isildur makes it 12k to go. And now Dur calls. Now there's some chance they're playing a game where you have to raise to 3,000 pre-flop. It's a way to make the stakes bigger than what they normally would be. I'm not entirely sure, but it also could just be a normal open and 3-bet. Now keep in mind you guys are very, very deep. The blinds are 501k and they have about 300k to start the hand. Isildur 3-bets to 12k, Dur calls, and the flop comes queen 10 deuce. Isildur bets the flop. We'd see him do that with hands like, aces, kings, ace, queen, king, queen. Maybe some draws like king, jack, jack, 9. Maybe some hands like 8, 7 of clubs or 9, 8 of spades. And possibly even with some weaker hands just bluffing like ace, 4 of spades. Or maybe even a complete air ball from time to time as well. When Dur calls, we're going to see him have hands like a pair or a straight draw or an open-ender. We're going to see all kinds of different stuff from Dur on the button. I don't think this call is too significant in terms of defining his range, other than saying that, he doesn't have his bottom like, 1/4 or 1/3 of hands. Those guys are just going to fold. So we do take a turn, and it is an offsuit 8 that creates a backdoor flush draw. So certainly an action card here on the turn. Now, this is where the action really starts to heat up, and Isildur fires again on the turn, looking to get some value. This is a card in the big blind you should be kind of scared of a little bit, that your opponent could have jack 9, they could have queen 8, they could have 10-8, all hands that are certainly possible in your opponent's range when you bet the flop and get to this turn. Anyway, Isildur bets 35k and Dur moves in $260,000 to go back over to Isildur, who does make the call. Interesting. All right, so we have two at least pretty good hands. We don't know if Dur has it or not. The river bricks off an offsuit 2. And Dur takes it down with the 8 deuce suited and beats Isildur's aces. Gets to hold here with his 2 pair. Now, certainly a close call pre-flop. Maybe a little bit too loose, I think. I think the 8 deuce suited, you might find a way to let that one go. But, suited hands in position heads up. Not totally unreasonable, especially if they're playing the game where you have to open to 3k. Either way, massive pot goes Dur's way. But the match certainly did not. Now, it's tough for us to know for sure, but we can make some estimates here roughly how much we think Isildur won off of Dur. And it seems like he won something to the tune of 4 or 5 million over a couple weeks of hardcore battling. If we take a look at their graphs and we pull up Isildur's graph here, you can see from this massive spike that at one point he was up almost $5 million. And this really all took place around October, November 2009. So if we look at Dur's graph, we can see that around the same period of time, he plummeted down around 7 million. It's, safe to say there was other games going on. I don't think it was entirely just them playing each other. But again, Isildur won $4 or $5 million off of Dur and now had quite the role if he wanted to take on some newcomers. Well, here's the problem. Isildur started to play a different game that has way too many cards.
One thing's for sure is he's definitely gotten a lot better very quickly. Definitely at both games. Obviously, he was better at No Limit to start, but he's improved drastically at PLO.
Now, Isildur didn't seem very experienced in the game of Pot Limit Omaha. I think he was doing it because it was hard to get action in No Limit Hold'em at stakes that were that high. I mean, we're talking about really high stakes, guys. How many people are going to post several $1 million and be willing to play? Not many. And Isildur is a man that likes to be in action, so he started to play Pot Limit Omaha. And now he was getting into a bit of a different area. It wasn't a specialty anymore. Obviously, you cannot overbet. You can only bet the size of the pot, which doesn't really play into his style. And he started to take on some really good players. He played Cole South for a bit. There were a couple other short matches along the way too. But he was doing okay until he ran into Brian Hastings. What happened that day was absolute sickness. Isildur went on to lose $4.2 million to Hastings over the course of the day, playing Pot Limit Omaha at 501k. Brian Hastings won $4.2 million. That is the biggest session anyone has ever had in the history of online poker. I think this graph from Brian Hastings says it all. Can you tell where they decided to play a little bit of heads up? Now, I managed to find the largest hand from that session on late December 8th between the two, and it went down like this. Hastings decides to go ahead and 3-bet the 7-6-4-3 over an open from Isildur with the Ace-Jack 10-5. Again, we do not know if they're playing the game where you have to raise to 3K, but either way, a bit of a loose 3-bet here from Hastings. 7-6-4-3, not a very good hand, particularly with 3 clubs. And Isildur does make the call. Again, not a great hand, but simply too much playability to fold to the 3-bet. The flop comes Jack 5-4 Rainbow. And this is really a big flop for both players. Hastings has a full 17 card wrap. He will make a straight on a deuce, 3, 6, 7, or 8. This is a seriously massive flop here for Brian Hastings. And he also has bomb pair to go along with it. Now, Hastings does decide to bet 13,000 here on the flop with his monster hand. And Isildur decides to raise to 48k. And I've got to say, with no redraws going on, I do not think that I like this play. It's simply too aggressive. Your opponent can have a set. Your opponent can have 2-pair but better redraws. Your opponent could have a wrap. There are so many strong hands that your opponent can have. And if they decide to go with it, Hastings is never going to have a hand like 5-4 and just stick it in. But Isildur plays his own brand of poker, that's for sure, and he does raise to 48,000 here, looking to get a little action from Brian Hastings. Now, Hastings does have a decision to make. He could decide to just stick it in here, or he could decide to call and try and navigate his way through some later streets. I don't really hate either of them. Also important to say that when you have a wrap on a board like this, it's much stronger when there's no flush draw, so I really don't mind either play, but he does decide to make the call. The turn is an offsuit 10, and this is where things start to get a little bit weird. Now Hastings decides to lead out the size of the pot, I assume trying to commit himself in case he does get raised. But I can't say that I'm a huge fan of this. If you do check in your opponent bets, you can call even if it's the size of the pot. Your draw is simply so good. I mean, you're almost a third or more to just hit a straight on the river, not even including the fact that you could maybe hit a hand like 2-pair or trips that could be good from time to time. So I'm not a big fan of the lead. It can't be losing because you have so much equity, but I think I'd prefer to check all of my hands here on a turn like a 10. Now, you will have some other hands that might want to lead, like maybe you had a hand like Jack 10, like King, Queen, Jack 10, where now you turn top 2 and an open ender, or maybe you have a hand like king, queen, 10-10. No, I think it'd be a little light in the flop. There aren't too many hands that we could really think of that would want to lead, but I think in general in this spot, I like just checking with all my hands. If this turns a queen, king, or ace, I like leading way more, especially if it's a queen or a king where the wheel doesn't get there. But I think on this turn, you should probably check all your holdings. Anyway, Hastings does bet the pot, and this turn's good for Isildur. He now has top 3 pair, which gives him more outs if he is up against a hand like a set of 4s, more outs to boat. But additionally, you know, it's unlikely his opponent has a value hand because he just blocks so many of the sets. So Isildur does jam. Now Hastings has to call, and we're playing some poker for a gigantic pot, a $600,000 pot here. And how you're running these matters a lot. Disaster strikes here for Isildur. The 7 rolls off, and now Hastings straight beats Isildur's top 2 pair, and he wins this $682,000 pot. Not even $600K, almost $700,000 here, guys, in this pot. Massive pot, but really only a fraction of the winnings. I mean, Hastings won 4.2 million. He only won about 360 in this pot, you know, or 340 in this pot. Obviously, still a good sized pot nonetheless. But think about how many other giant pots had to get shipped Hastings' way in order for him to win such a massive number. Now, I managed to find an EV graph of that session. If you don't know what an EV graph is, it shows how much you should have won if the cards came out fair and neutral versus how much you did win or lose. And generally speaking, if it's higher than what you won or lost, then you ran bad. And if it's lower, then you ran good. Well, this is the graph for Isildur over that stretch of time. He ran what appears to be almost $3 million under EV. That's right. Hastings should have only won 1.2, 1.3 million, but ended up winning 4.2. That's a pretty good day. By the end of this, Hastings had won almost all of Isildur's winnings, and I don't ever feel like Isildur fully recovered from this. I mean, he had some good runs, don't get me wrong, and he's actually had a pretty good 2017. But overall, the just sheer amount of destruction from this session, it's really hard to see any way that anyone could ever come back from this. You know, this was a truly sick day in the history of online poker.
So Brian purchased the 30,000 hands from PTR.
So those were not hands he'd been playing against.
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
This was a fairly standard practice at the time, though. A lot of people were doing it.
Now, some drama did develop following the session, where it became clear that Brian Hastings had shared hand histories with Brian Townsend and Cole South in order to analyze Isildur's play and come up with how to beat him. They had gone through the hands, they'd done the ranges, and really, this quote from Cole South from a podcast with Joe Ingram kind of says a lot about what went down. Well, actually, let's just roll the clip with Cole South.
What did happen was Brian Townsend bought some hand histories from PTR. These are, I hesitate to say public hand histories, but they don't have like the mucked hole cards. It's not like these are hand histories from my matches against Isildur or something that I sent them. And I guess Brian had hand histories that he bought from PTR. He then just like had some overall tips for playing against Isildur. It was not anything remotely, I hesitate to say useful. It was just like the guy's like aggressive in this spot and like,
Right.
I don't know, it was like just talking to your friends about poker.
Now, a lot of people feel like this was unfair for Isildur. They teamed up against him. And while that might be true, I also have to say this. In the high stakes world, there's a lot of this stuff that goes on. People talk, people share hands, people share strategies, people try and create strategies that can't be beaten. That's just the way it is. And when you play for millions of dollars, people are going to be after you. And that's why you have to be protective about who you play. If I sit down at a table and I play someone, I play them knowing it could be anyone on that account. They could have cited any of my hands. They could have gotten it from some Russian hand history site. They could have it from some player I played. That stuff is all out there, and you have to know that it can be against you. I'm not saying that that makes it okay. I'm not saying that players should do that, but that's the nature of high stakes games, and that's also why you have to be careful who you play against. I do also want to say one more thing before we go. when it comes to gambling, try and gamble responsibly. And I know a lot of people look at Isildur as a hero. I'm not taking away from that. Certainly some of the best moments, maybe the best moment in online history is because of Isildur. But he was not bankrolled to put his life on the line like that for so many dollars. And so make sure when you decide to gamble, you do so responsibly, because I like you guys and I'd like to see you around in the future. All right, thanks for tuning in today, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Also, just a quick reminder, I'm doing a lot of streaming lately. So 6 a.m. Pacific time, probably right here on YouTube, but I might throw in on Twitch sometime in the near future. 6 a.m. Pacific time, stop on by for some bankroll challenge. We're trying to turn $100 into $10,000. Should be a fun ride. I'll see you there. Oh yeah, and while I've got you, hit that subscribe button and join the Empire.